Hello, and welcome to another edition of Eagle News Forum. My name is Dr. Malcolm Beach, and I'm your host for today's show. And my co host is Malcolm Muhammad. How are you, sir, today?
I'm fine. Thank you for asking, Dr. Beach. Pleasure to be here.
Okay. Yeah, we've had a lot of activities over the last couple of weeks uh, about resources in Africa. And one of the things that we're going to talk about today is what are these resources and what difference does it make or should it make to the well being of both the people on the continent of Africa as well as the diasporans all across the world? This show talks about pulling together the African diaspora to work with more activities and programs and developments on the African continent. So one of the things I guess, Malcolm, you were talking about just the other day was the resources that seem to be available. Did you have a question or a thought about that?
Well, I think that for a long time there's been a discussion in the Black diaspora about how the land in Africa is so rich, in terms of mineral resources, in terms of arable land. So the capacity to produce more than what the population need is there every single day that we wake up. Obviously, the social economic conditions are not always favorable and less than satisfactory to many on the continent. So the question becomes, what should our approach be? Obviously there's a legacy of colonialism. There are competing interests for those resources. So the question becomes, in this environment, this global environment where so many countries are competing for the use of Africa's resources for their benefit, even if it's at the expense of the native population, the question becomes, what approach should the native African population and the brothers and sisters of the native population that are in the diaspora, what can we do together to maximize our productivity and subsequent productivity gains?
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying, Malcolm. In fact, if you look at some of the fundamentals of wealth building, which is, for instance, let's take one particular system that we all are familiar with. It's called capitalism. And the four pillars of capitalism are land, labor, capital, and entrepreneurship. Those are the four pillars of an economic system that we function in today, all around the world. And the key, one of them that we're talking about today is the land. A lot of folks often think about land as what's on the surface, of the land. You're going to build a building, you need some land, to do that. But in Africa, it's a little different. When I say it's different, it's only because not only is the surface of the land that's important, it's what's beneath the surface that turns out that has a lot of different wealth. In other words, all the mining elements, gold, diamonds, lithium, uranium, a lot of these minerals that are under the ground in Africa actually represent a great deal of wealth. And for years, the Western powers and the Western countries have been able to extract this wealth from under the ground in Africa. And the cost or the exchange, what they paid for that, those minerals have been minimal, to the point that the people who actually own the land, the people whose countries, those independent countries that actually own the land, benefit very little from the minerals that are actually under the ground. And I say this because it's so clear now in the world. If you look at the United Arab Emirates, look at Kuwait, you look at Saudi Arabia, okay? These are wealthy nations for the citizens of those countries. It's so incredible in those countries that the national citizens of those countries don't even work at all. They don't have to work for anything. They do no hard labor in those countries.
I think you should repeat that for the people in the back. I don't think they heard you. That it is possible in 2023 for whole populations of a nation to not work yet enjoy more benefits than most people will ever enjoy.
That's it. That's what I'm saying. It's so incredible when you think about it. Everybody else is hustling, they have to import labor. They got to import people, give them a visa, 2-year visa to come and work in that country because they're not going to do any hard work. They're just don't do anything about that. And why is that possible? It's because they have managed to reap the benefits of the oil. That's their asset. Their one asset is oil under the ground, under the land that they own. You know, they're independently own this land. All the citizens of these United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, they own the land, and therefore they benefit from that ownership. And in Africa, you've got the same thing and even more. Africa has more assets under the ground than Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Kuwait put together.
But see, this is why I asked the question about, I use the term approach, because what you're saying is that you got one person who is wealthier than another person, but the person with less wealth has a higher standard of living than the person with greater wealth. So you have to ask the question in, you know, because what you're saying is money is not really the problem, right? Because you got plenty of wealth. Wealth is not your wealth is not the problem, because it's, if we look at your balance sheet, you're better off than your competitor. You have more resources, more capital.
In terms of resources.
The reality is your competitor or your neighbor has a superior approach, or if you don't want to say superior, has an approach that creates more benefit.
More benefits for the citizen. Right, more benefits for the
that is used by African leadership. You know, so I mean, sometimes people are better than others, and you know, but the job is to learn. When somebody, you know, when your neighbor's doing better than you, the job is to knock on your neighbor's door and meet and greet, develop a rapport, and ask the neighbor to share their information. You know, but if we are not willing to learn, you know, then that's where the problem comes in. So that's what we're really like. The real problem that we're facing right now is, what do we need to learn to create better for ourselves? Otherwise, you know, if we're always going to have the approach where I'm just going to allow my frustrations to build until I explode, you know, it's like a child throwing a tantrum. You know, and that's just acceptable when you're a child, because the child has to learn to control his or herself, right? And that's why you have parents. You know, but when you're an adult, you know, in an adult population, then both, and I'm talking about the diaspora as well as our people on the continent. You know, we are some of the most well-educated people in the world. You know, we go to school with some of those people that you say are living well in these other countries, and you know, sometimes you learn that, oh, I actually perform better than you in school, so you're not the superior person that maybe we thought you were because of the color of your skin is lighter. You know, you end up saying, oh, okay, well, and maybe you learn other things about them. Then maybe they're not the best people either. But yet and still, when they go back to their country, they have a higher standard of living. So you have to ask the question: if education is not the problem, if resources are not the problem, then the question is, well, what is the problem? And at the end of the day, it turns out that sometimes you need to just do things different, do things in a better way. And that's what we need to talk about. You know, what can we do better? Because resources are not the problem, education is not the problem. What can we do better?
Yeah, I think that at this point, well, it's two things. One, we have to develop a plan that we all agree to. When I say that, I mean, we have to go ahead and acknowledge what you just said, is that the problem is not the education, you know, and that the wealth that God has given us. I mean, this is it's a gift from God to have uranium in your backyard. I mean, you can't beat that. Just like the Saudi Arabian, they got oil in their backyard, and that is a gift from God. It's nothing that they did to put the oil there. And Africans have to understand that they've got what they need to thrive, not just survive, but to thrive. And what they have to do is develop a plan to better utilize those resources. You know, you've got some African countries, for one reason or another, especially this recently, we had all these coups happening in Africa. And it's almost like part of what they're saying is they're telling the Westerners to get out. Just leave me alone. Get out of my country and let me manage my own resources and let me manage my own country without you telling me what to do and how to do it, you know? And this is something that is really, it is revolutionary, you know, for Africans to say, well, wait a minute, maybe I can do this myself. Because just as you said, once we've been to the same schools, you know, in the Western world, and we find out that they're not any smarter than us, and most of the time we're smarter than they are, you know. So there's no real reason that we need them to be guardians of our particular wealth. You know, they don't have a better idea, judgment-wise, as to what to do with the minerals under the ground than we do. Yeah. You know, but our leadership, this is something else you had indicated, our leadership has to come forth and take a stand. They say, well, we're going to do this without anybody else telling us what to do. We're going to manage our own resources. And once we can get to that particular point, I think things will be better.
Yeah, and that's an important point, you know, the leadership component, and then the leadership has to consider what we've been talking about, which is, what do you have? You know, you have the wealth of the land, and not only that, you have a well-educated population. You have to see people, you know, this conversation is always, well, you got black people in the diaspora, you know, they're earning high incomes, some of them, right? They're well-educated, they're earning high income. But the other part of the story is never touched. They had to compete for those high earning positions. And in the marketplace, you're competing with people from all over the world. So not only do these people, do our people in the diaspora, are they highly educated and affluent, but they had to compete against other people who are also in the marketplace for those incomes and for their affluence. So that should tell you. So why am I mentioning that? Because the leadership have to understand that you have a very good hand, right? And you have the example of a China, and China is trying to recruit, for example, some of the computer scientists that are in America and in Europe to come to China, and they're holding out not just a carrot, you know, they're holding out a very delicious menu for these computer scientists, other intellectuals that are successful, that have competed in the marketplace to develop their skills and to create affluence for themselves. So the African leadership has to do something similar, because you're not we want to say, well, can you just help me because we're both black? Okay, I mean, that's fine. That's why we're having the conversation. But at the end of the day, you know, you got to pay the cost to be the boss. You know, so if you want something done, people don't live off of off of thin air. When you come to the marketplace, all the merchants want you to pay. We know you want something, that's why you're there, but you got to pay if you want the merchandise. So, so there has to be a as you mentioned, a plan to pay for that labor force to accomplish the goals that the leadership wants accomplished. And there has to be a willingness for that. And then, the other part of the narrative is what the Europeans and Americans are saying, that these are the Caucasian ones typically saying, well, the Africans, it's not our fault that Africa's in debt. They just don't understand finance and accounting, right? That's what they say. But the reality is we have people, in New York, in London, other financial centers who raise billions of dollars for European and American enterprises. So we have people who understand money. Now, if you're a president, but you have a high school education, then maybe you need to get some advisors who actually can explain to you how to finance your country for the next 30 to 50 years, right? And you have people in the diaspora who can do that. Obviously, people have to be vetted, right? Because, everybody that looks like us is not for us, as we say over here. So, yeah. Yeah,
unfortunately, that is true. And I think that what you're saying is true. In other words, if Africa doesn't have the resources, definitely the diaspora has the resources. They have the training, the technology, and the understanding. As you say, maybe it's all about money and what happens with money. I mean, think about what you just said. Suppose this whole thing about freedom and democracy and all that is really based on the money. If you have enough money, you're going to have more freedom.
That's right.
And that could be something that our African leaders and the diaspora we haven't talked about yet.
And I agree. And what you're really saying is spot on, because there was a study, I don't recall the title of the study, but I just happened to be reading, and they essentially discovered that most people on the planet are the same. They just want to go shopping.
How about that?
So at the end of the day, and we know from our experience, 90% of our problems can be solved with money. So really, like you said, if you can get the economy part right, then, like a African, this was years ago when I was on the campus of Howard University, and I was first found out about the African Union and Kwame Nkrumah's vision of an African Union, and I thought it was a great idea. But I'm not raised in Africa. But one of my students, another student, I shared with her that vision, that thought, and she just said, "Well, people just want to eat, Malcolm. It's not
bottom line, huh?"
Right, and let me know it's not complicated. So I'm looking for some political integration, and she's like, "Well, I might lose my cultural identity in a political integration, but people just want to eat." So that let me know economic integration, as you're talking about, is the path forward. It's all about the economy at the end of the day. We have to, because nobody cares who's in power as long as I got food on my table. It's like, okay, people complain about the corruption. They know the leadership in many countries are corrupt, but nobody complains until inflation is so high that I can't buy bread. Now the corruption becomes a problem because you're taking food off of my table.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the thing about corruption is it's really ridiculous if you look at it in a macroeconomic basis, meaning that some political leader will get $1 million or $2 million in cash, to sign a contract, but the person extracting the resources is going to make $200 million,
That's
so
right.
2 million versus $200 million, that means they just don't understand. I mean, 50-50 would have been, a good place to start.
That's right.
But when you're given the country, and that's just the corruption money, not even talking about the money that actually the tax money that should go to the people's benefit. A lot of times there is no taxes, so you got an extraction of resources, and you've got no benefit to the people that actually own the resources. And that's what a lot of Africans are beginning to look at, their leadership and their country's relationships with other countries, especially the Western countries, is taking advantage of. And what we're suggesting here today is that, the African diaspora can be of benefit. But as Malcolm has stated, it's got to be a fair exchange. As they say, a fair exchange is no robbery. The diaspora needs to get something out of the deal too. We're not a philanthropic group. It's a fair exchange. And if there's a fair, because even the diaspora, while we may have a lot of technological knowledge and we don't have that wealth either. The diaspora is not wealthy. It looks like we got a lot of money, but that's just a job that pays well for a short period of time until the layoff notices go out there. And they say, well, we don't need you anymore. We got some new robots coming to town. And then all of that is gone that you thought that you had. But so we're going to have to look at this again and ask some of our African leaders and our diasporan leaders to consider a plan that would allow the resources of Africa be reformatted to benefit both the people that live in Africa as well as the diaspora. And we got to come up with that plan pretty soon, man.
And that's a good point. And the thing, we learn from academia is that they're models, right?
Yeah.
You're trying to accomplish something, you need a mentor. Otherwise you're gonna have to learn, the hard way from your own experience. But they're models. And we have an example of Eritrea. The leadership in Eritrea accepted the values that we as an African country will be independent. We are not going to become dependent on loans and foreign aid. We're going to build our economy and forge our own destiny. And we have an example of what they call the Kalui in Eritrea. And even the foreign business people, one of the main things they said was, this is a good deal for everybody. So as you mentioned, the Eritrean government and people are getting 50% of the deal. But also they said there's no corruption anywhere. This is what they said.
Yeah.
They said we're not finding any corruption in the Eritrean government. Because normally everybody knows outside the United States, you got to pay the government officials to get something done, even though there's a cost for what you want done, but then you got to pay the government official, whoever you're paying the fee for, you got to pay them too. To get anything done. And these people are saying the Eritrean government, they have not found any corruption. And they're just elated because they understand, like what you mentioned earlier, we're going to make so much money for access to this resources. And we didn't have to bribe anybody. That's what they really said. We didn't have, normally you go into these places, you got to bribe people. We didn't have to bribe nobody. So maybe they're going to make hundreds of millions of dollars and they didn't make any payoff. But at the end of the day, they're giving half, supposedly according to this one report, they're going to give half or more to the Eritrean government entity that's managed it. I think they're calling it Enamico. So there's an example. We don't have to just theorize, well, how does this done? We figure out, we can go learn from somebody who's already doing it, who's doing very well with the opportunity, and we can learn from that and duplicate that.
No, that's an excellent example. You absolutely, and it's right there on the continent of Africa. You don't have to go far to figure it out. Exactly. And it sounds like the people of Eritrea are going to benefit for this in the long run.
And
thank you very much. We're about to wrap up. Our time is just about up on the show today. We hope all of you get a chance to stay in touch with us. You can send us an email at beacheagle@gmail.com, BEECHEAGLE EAGLE@gmail.com, or you can call me on the telephone, 202-510-8094, and we'll engage you and get some of your ideas, and maybe you can become a guest on the show. But once again, thank you very much, Malcolm, for your participation today. And this is Dr. Malcolm Beach signing off for Eagle News Forum. Thank you.
Take care.